The wind moved over the New Mexico plains like a restless spirit that never found its home. It whispered through the sagebrush, bent the dry grasses, and carried the faint scent of horses, dust, and heartbreak. The year was 1878, and the land was a hard, unforgiving teacher. But it bred souls who were just as unyielding. One of those souls was Clara Bennett, daughter of Thomas Bennett, a once prosperous rancher whose luck had withered like the parched earth beneath his boots. The Bennett ranch had once stretched proudly across 2,000 acres of rolling grass and red soil. Now only a few dozen cattle remained, ribs showing through their hides. The drought had lingered too long. The rivers were bone dry, the wells deep but empty. Clara had grown up under the wide skies, learning to ride before she could read, her heart tied to the horizon. But lately, even that seemed to fade beneath the shadow of debt and despair. Her father, desperate to save what generations of Bennetts had built, had struck a deal. A marriage contract, and not of love, but of survival. Clara was to be married to Charles Whitmore, a wealthy land baron from Santa Fe whose influence spread wider than the Rio Grande itself. Whitmore was older, by nearly 20 years, and his reputation, though gilded by wealth, carried the whisper of cruelty. He owned half the county and was set on owning the rest one way or another. The agreement had been made without her voice. Her father, with trembling hands and weary eyes, had only said, "It's the only way, Clara. This ranch, it's our life. Without it, we've got nothing." Clara had tried to understand, but something deep inside her rebelled. She had always believed the land had a soul, that freedom was as sacred as the open sky. To sell herself for a deed and a signature felt like the cruelest kind of death. Still, she bit her tongue and nodded because she loved her father. That evening, after the sun sank behind the mesas, Clara saddled her horse, Dusty, and rode out into the night. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to breathe. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, cold and brilliant. The moonlight turned the desert silver, casting long shadows across the dry riverbeds. Then came the storm. It rose without warning, a roaring wall of dust and wind that tore across the prairie. The horse reared, panicked, and Clara felt herself thrown into the darkness. When she awoke, the world was spinning. Wind howling, grit burning her eyes, lungs choking on sand. She crawled for shelter but could see nothing but swirling red dust. That's when she saw him. A dark figure moved through the storm, tall, broad-shouldered, his form cutting through the chaos like a shadow given life. He wore buckskin and beads, his black hair tied back, his eyes bright even through the fury of the wind. "Stay still," he shouted over the howl. His voice was deep, roughened by dust and distance. He lifted her gently, carrying her toward the rocks. There, beneath a low ledge of stone, they found refuge. For a long while, neither spoke. Clara could only hear the pounding of her own heart. The man struck flint and brought to life a small flame, sheltering it in his hands until it grew. In its light, she could see his face, high cheekbones, sun-browned skin, eyes like embers. He offered her water from a leather pouch. "You are hurt," he said softly, his accent wrapping around the English words. "It's just a scrape," she managed, brushing at her temple, where blood mingled with dust. He nodded. "Storm will pass soon. You are far from home. I lost my horse," she said. "I didn't mean to ride this far." He looked out into the dark, thoughtful. "You should not ride alone in this country." Clara bristled a little. "I can handle myself." A faint smile touched his lips. "I believe you can." He told her his name then, Tarek of the Chiricahua Apache. His people lived across the hills and valleys of that land, long before her father ever built fences across it. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried centuries of sorrow. He spoke of the land not as property, but as kin, a living thing that breathes and remembers. They shared the fire in silence, two souls from worlds apart, bound by the same wind and the same loneliness. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The air was still, the land washed clean by the night's fury. Tarek led her through the canyons until they found her horse grazing nervously near a dry creek bed. As she mounted, Clara hesitated. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life." Tarek looked up at her. "The storm saved you," he said simply. "I only showed you the way." Before she could speak again, he turned and disappeared among the rocks, silent as a shadow. Clara rode home, But her mind stayed behind, back in the canyon, where the firelight flickered across Tarek's eyes. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room. Her father's words echoed through her head. "You'll be married by month's end." The thought made her stomach twist. How could she marry a man like Whitmore? Cold, calculating, a stranger. When she had just met someone who made her feel alive for the first time in years. She told herself it was foolishness, a passing fancy born from fear and gratitude. But in her heart something deeper stirred. It wasn't just attraction. It was recognition, as though she had known Tarek in some other life beneath the same burning skies. The next few days were restless ones. Clara worked the ranch by day, helping mend fences, driving cattle, doing anything to keep her hands busy and her thoughts still. But every time the wind rustled through the grass, she thought she heard his voice. Every time the sun sank behind the hills, she looked toward the canyons. Then one morning, as she led her horse to water, she saw him again. Tarek stood at the edge of the pasture, half hidden by the mesquite trees. He didn't move until their eyes met. Then slowly he stepped forward. "You should not come here," she whispered, glancing back toward the house. "If my father sees—" "I needed to return something," he said, holding out his hand. In it lay her silver pendant, the one her mother had given her before she died, the one she thought she'd lost in the storm. Clara's breath caught. "You found it. It was near the canyon," he said. "I thought it belonged with you." Their hands brushed as she took it, and the world seemed to stop for a heartbeat. "Why did you come back?" she asked softly. He hesitated, searching for the words. "Because the wind told me you were not meant for the man they have chosen." Clara's throat tightened. "How could you know that?" "Because your eyes," he said quietly, "do not look toward him. They look toward the horizon." The sound of boots crunching on gravel broke the spell. Her father's voice bellowed from the porch, calling her name. She turned, startled, and when she looked back, Tarek was gone. But the echo of his words stayed with her long after. A whisper carried on the wind, promising something she didn't yet understand but could feel deep in her soul. Somewhere between duty and the desert sky, love had already taken root. The days that followed passed like a slow-moving storm, heavy, silent, charged with something unspoken. Clara Bennett went about her chores as though nothing had changed, yet everything inside her had. She moved through the ranch with her hands steady but her heart restless, her thoughts never straying far from the Apache warrior who had saved her life. It had been a week since she'd last seen Tarek, and yet the memory of his voice lingered like the scent of rain after a drought. The way he had looked at her, not as a prize, not as property, but as though she were something rare and alive, had set fire to her soul. But there was no place for such thoughts on Bennett Ranch. Not when her father spent his nights poring over ledgers and whiskey, muttering about debts and deadlines. Not when every letter from Santa Fe brought another reminder that her engagement to Charles Whitmore was to be announced at the town spring gathering in 2 weeks. Clara's father believed he was saving her. She knew better. Whitmore was power-wrapped in a gentleman's coat. His visits had begun soon after the drought. Polite smiles, fine words, and the faint smell of cologne that didn't belong in the dust and sweat of ranch life. He'd offered to settle the Bennett debts in exchange for Clara's hand. A fair bargain, her father had said. A secure future. But Clara saw the truth in Whitmore's eyes. The cold calculation of a man who saw her not as a partner, but as another piece of land to own, and yet, the world was not kind to women who dreamed of choosing their own fate. One evening, the sun was bleeding gold over the mesas, and Clara was gathering wildflowers by the creek, when she heard the faint sound of hooves behind her. Her heart stuttered. She turned slowly, half afraid she'd imagined it again. But there he was, Tarek, sitting tall on a paint horse, the wind teasing strands of his dark hair. "You should not be here," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He dismounted, his movements quiet, deliberate. "I am careful," he said simply. "No one saw me." Clara glanced toward the distant ranch house where smoke curled from the chimney. "If my father—" "I know." He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "But I could not stay away." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt alive, humming like the desert after lightning. "You came all this way. Why?" she finally asked. Tarek's eyes softened. "Because the wind does not tell lies. It said your heart is not free." Clara's breath caught. "I am to be married," she whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it real. Married to a man you do not love, Tarek replied, his tone gentle but unyielding. She turned away, staring down at the flowers in her hand. Love doesn't keep a roof over our heads, Tarek. My father owes Whitmore everything. If I refuse him, we'll lose the ranch. He took a slow step closer. And if you marry him, what do you lose then? His words pierced her like arrows, not cruelly, but clean and true. She couldn't answer. Instead, she knelt and began tying the flowers together, her fingers trembling. You wouldn't understand, she said quietly. He crouched beside her. Maybe I do. My people are told what they must give up every day. Our land, our ways, our children. We are told to survive by surrender, but we do not. Clara looked up, meeting his eyes. In them she saw the same fierce fire she'd felt in herself since childhood. The hunger for freedom, for life beyond the fences. They stayed like that for a long time, the desert holding its breath around them. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. It's wrong. What we're doing. If anyone knew, they'd... I know, Tarek said. But I do not care, her heart thudded. You should. Maybe. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. But I will not. The silence between them broke like glass. He reached out slowly, his hand brushing her cheek. The touch was careful, reverent, as though he feared she might vanish like smoke. When he finally kissed her, it was not gentle. It was wild, desperate, like a man claiming something the world had told him he could never have. And Clara, despite everything she'd ever been told, kissed him back. That night she returned home with her hair tangled and her heart on fire. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Tarek, the strength in his hands, the calm in his voice, the truth in his gaze. But the world does not stay still for love. The next morning, word spread through town. Someone had seen an Apache warrior near the Bennett land. The sheriff was alerted, and by sundown her father had heard. When he found her, she was in the barn brushing Dusty's coat. Clara. His voice thundered through the rafters. You been out talking to that Indian again? Her hands froze. Father Day, don't you lie to me. He slammed his fist against a post, the sound sharp as a gunshot. Do you have any idea what folks are saying? That you're running wild with a savage? Her chest tightened. He's not what they think. He's not your concern. Her father barked. You're engaged to Whitmore. You'll be Mrs. Charles Whitmore before spring, and that's final. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she swallowed them. What if I don't love him? Her father looked at her then, really looked at her. And for a moment, beneath the anger, she saw the fear there. Love don't keep you fed, girl, he said hoarsely. It never did. He turned and left before she could answer. That night, Clara sat by her window, watching the moon rise over the hills. Somewhere out there, she knew Tarek was watching the same moon, breathing the same wind. The thought gave her strength and broke her heart. The days that followed were tense. Whitmore arrived from Santa Fe, all fine clothes and false smiles. He brought her gifts, pearls, lace, silk. She accepted them with trembling hands, but every polished stone felt like a shackle. He spoke of their life to come, of his estate, his plans, his ambitions. You'll live comfortably, my dear, he said. You'll want for nothing, except freedom, Clara thought bitterly, except love. When the engagement was announced, the whole town gathered. There were cheers and clinking glasses, but Clara's smile never reached her eyes. In the back of the crowd, she thought she saw a familiar figure near the stables, tall, silent, watching. Her heart nearly stopped. Tarek stood in the shadows, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But the fire in his gaze said everything words could not. And in that moment, Clara understood. She could no longer pretend. The promise she'd made was not hers to keep. Later that night, as the dance music faded and the desert quieted, she slipped away into the darkness. There, under the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, Tarek waited. When she reached him, he spoke only one line, low and steady, like a vow sworn to the earth itself. If she is promised to another, he said, then I will fight for what is already mine. And as his hand found hers, Clara knew that nothing, not her father, not Whitmore, not even the whole world, then could turn her heart away again. The spring sun was merciless that year, beating down on the land until even the rocks seemed to bleed heat. The Bennett ranch lay silent under its weight. the wind still, the cattle listless, and the air thick with things unspoken. Since the night of the engagement ball, Clara Bennett had not seen Tarek again, though her heart searched for him every time the horizon shimmered. But she knew he was out there. She could feel him like a heartbeat just beyond sight. Her father, meanwhile, had thrown himself into preparations for her wedding to Charles Whitmore, a man whose name carried weight in every saloon and courthouse across the New Mexico territory. Whitmore came often now, dressed in fine suits that didn't belong to this dusty land, his hands soft, his smile sharper than a Bowie knife. He treated Clara as though she were already his. Every visit he took a little more of her freedom, a say in what she wore, where she rode, who she spoke to. Her father didn't see it. The townsfolk didn't care. To them, Whitmore was salvation in a three-piece suit. But Clara knew better. She'd seen the way Whitmore's men rode out at night, armed and cruel. She'd heard whispers that he'd been forcing ranchers to sell their lands for pennies, using threats and blood when words failed. And she'd heard the stories of the Apache raids he'd put down. Stories that smelled more of slaughter than justice. Each tale made her stomach twist tighter with dread. Because if Tarek and his people had been among those Whitmore called his enemies, then she was bound to the very man who'd hunted them. The truth came to her one morning like a rattlesnake strike. She was in town, helping her father purchase supplies, when she overheard two ranch hands talking outside the general store. "They say Whitmore's sending men north again," one said, spitting tobacco. "Claims them Apaches took a herd of his cattle." The other snorted. "Ain't no Apache took nothing. He just wants their land clear. Hell, I heard he paid the army to drive him out last time." Clara's hands went cold. The bag of flour she was holding slipped from her grasp and split across the ground. By the time she made it back to the ranch, her heart was pounding like thunder. She didn't care if it was reckless anymore. That night, when the moon rose, she saddled Dusty and rode for the canyons. She found Tarek near the edge of a dry riverbed, where the land broke open into red stone cliffs. His campfire flickered against the canyon walls, throwing long shadows that danced like spirits. He turned as she approached, his expression unreadable, until he saw her face. Then he stood, stepping forward quickly. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "They're coming for you," she said, breathless. "Whitmore's sending men, and maybe the army. He says your people stole from him." Tarek's jaw tightened. "He lies." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But they believe him, my father. Everyone does." He looked past her, out toward the horizon where the moon hung like a blade. "He takes our land, our water, our lives. And still we are the thieves." There was no bitterness in his tone, and only weary truth. Clara stepped closer. "You have to leave. Go south to the mountains, before it's too late." Tarek turned to her then, and in his eyes she saw the same fire she'd seen that first night. "And if I run, he will only follow." "No, Clara, this ends now." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I will face him," Tarek said simply. "Not with war, but with words and honor." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You'll be killed." "Maybe, but I will not hide from a coward." 2 days later, the town gathered again, this time for Whitmore's land meeting. Settlers, ranchers, and traders filled the square, their faces flushed from sun and whiskey. Whitmore stood on the porch of the saloon, a cigar between his fingers, his voice booming as he spoke about progress and civilization. Clara stood beside her father, numb with dread. Then the crowd parted. A figure stepped out from the edge of the street, tall, proud, wrapped in the colors of the desert. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Tarek. He walked slowly, each step measured, his gaze fixed on Whitmore. Behind him, a few Apache elders watched from a distance, silent as ghosts. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You've got some nerve showing your face here, savage." Tarek stopped at the foot of the porch. "You speak of law and honor," he said, his English steady, his voice carrying through the heat. "But you have neither. You take what is not yours. You call my people thieves, yet you are the one who steals," the crowd murmured. The sheriff stepped forward, hand on his revolver, but Whitmore raised a hand. He wanted the show. "You come here to accuse me?" Whitmore sneered. "On what right?" Tarek's gaze didn't waver. "On the right of a man who has nothing left to lose and accept truth." Whitmore laughed, a cruel sound that made Clara's stomach turn. "You've already lost, boy. This land belongs to me." "No," Tarek said. "It belongs to no man." He paused, his voice softening as he looked toward Clara. "And the woman you claim belongs to me in heart, if not yet in name." The air went still. The crowd turned. Clara's breath stopped. Whitmore's face twisted with fury. "What did you say?" Tarek met his gaze evenly. "You heard me. She is promised to you by paper. But she was promised to me by the wind, the stars, and her own heart." Gasps erupted. Whitmore's face flushed red. He lunged forward, striking Tarek across the face with the back of his hand. The sheriff tried to grab Tarek, but he stood unmoving, blood on his lip, his eyes burning. "You call me savage," Tarek said. "Yet you are the one who strikes without cause." Whitmore drew his gun. "You should have stayed in your desert, Apache." Before he could fire, the sheriff stepped between them. "Enough, not here." "Not in front of the town." Whitmore glared, holstered his weapon, and turned to his men. "Get him out of my sight." They dragged Tarek into the street, beating him with rifle stocks until he fell to his knees. Clara broke free from her father's grasp, running toward him. "Stop it," she screamed, throwing herself between them. "Leave him alone." The sheriff hesitated, but Whitmore's men didn't. One shoved her aside. She hit the dirt hard, her vision spinning. When she looked up, Tarek was on the ground, blood dark against his skin. Whitmore stepped closer, voice low and venomous. "You should have known your place." Tarek looked up at him through the blood. "My place," he rasped, "is where she stands." That night, Clara found him again. The townsfolk had dragged him to the edge of town and left him there, broken but alive. She rode out under the cover of darkness, a lantern clutched in her trembling hand. When she reached him, he tried to stand, but she stopped him, tears streaking her dusty face. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "I couldn't stay away." She knelt beside him, washing the blood from his brow with her kerchief. "You're hurt." "I've been hurt worse," he murmured. "But never by love." Her hands trembled. "You don't understand. Whitmore will come after you. He'll come after all of you." "Then let him," Tarek said, his gaze fierce despite the pain. "But I will not run again. If she is promised to another, I will fight for what is already mine." Clara pressed her forehead against his. "Then I'll fight beside you." And as the firelight flickered over them, two hearts, one born of the wild, the other of the West, bound themselves to each other, ready to face a world determined to tear them apart. The desert changed after that night. What had once been quiet land now felt watchful, heavy, as though it too knew that blood would soon be spilled upon its soil. The wind carried whispers from both sides, whispers of war. In the days following the confrontation in town, Clara Bennett became a ghost in her own home. Her father forbade her to leave the ranch, claiming it was for her safety. But she knew the truth. He was ashamed, not only of her defiance, but of the truth she had shouted before all of Whitmore's men. Everyone in town now knew the Bennett girl's heart belonged to an Apache. She had become a scandal. A warning, a whisper behind every saloon door. Her father drank more. Whitmore, furious after the public humiliation, withdrew his offer to buy the ranch and replaced it with something darker. Rumor spread that he had hired gunmen to finish what his fists could not. And as the sun set over the red mesas, Clara knew one thing: she could not wait for salvation. She had to find Tarek before Whitmore found him. That night she stole away. She saddled Dusty in silence, slipped a small revolver into her saddlebag, and rode north toward the canyonlands. The wind was cold, the moon high, and each mile carried her farther from the world she'd known, a world of fences, fathers, and fear. When she reached the Apache camp, dawn was breaking. The sky bled rose and gold over the cliffs. Tarek was there, standing tall among his people, his arm bandaged but his spirit unbroken. The moment he saw her, the hardness in his eyes softened, replaced by something fierce and aching. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly, but his hands trembled when he took hers. "I had to," she whispered. "Whitmore means to kill you." Tarek looked past her toward the horizon. "He has already tried. He will again. But this time we are ready." Clara turned and saw what he meant. His people, men, women, even children's size, were packing what little they had. They were preparing to move, to vanish into the deep lands where soldiers and settlers could not follow. "I don't want you to run," she said, voice breaking. "I want you to live." He looked at her then, truly looked, and she saw the truth in his eyes. He didn't know how to do both. For a few stolen days, Clara remained among the Apache. It was a world she'd never known, one that humbled her with its grace and harsh beauty. She helped the women grind corn and fetch water, listened to the old ones speak of the spirits in the wind and the stories written in the stars. Tarek showed her the sacred places hidden in the canyon, the cliff dwellings carved by ancestors, the pools where the water still ran cool and clear, the trees that whispered when the night grew still. In that wild refuge, their love grew like the desert flowers after rain, rare, fragile, yet unstoppable. They were two hearts from different worlds, yet when they lay beneath the same blanket of stars, the difference between them ceased to matter. "I used to think love was something you waited for," Clara said one night as the fire crackled low. "Now I think it's something you fight for." Tarek smiled, tracing a finger along her jaw. "Then we fight together." But peace was never meant to last in that land. On the fourth morning, a scout rode in from the south, breathless, dust-covered, terror in his eyes. "Soldiers," he said in Apache, "coming from Fort McRae, with Whitmore's men riding beside them." The camp erupted into motion. Tarek barked orders. Women gathered the children. Warriors took up their rifles and bows. Clara's heart pounded. "You have to go," Tarek told her. "If they find you here, I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "This is not your fight. It is now." Tarek stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then stay close." By afternoon, the dust cloud appeared on the horizon in a storm of horses, bayonets, and greed. Whitmore rode at the front beside the captain, a thin smile cutting across his face. When the first gunshots echoed through the canyon, the world erupted. Smoke and fire filled the air. The cries of horses and men blended into a chaos that tore at the soul. Clara had never known fear like that, not even the night she was lost in the storm. But through the smoke she saw Tarek fighting, his rifle steady, his movements swift as lightning. He was a part of the land itself, untamed, unbroken, magnificent. When Whitmore's men reached the center of the camp, Clara saw him. Whitmore himself, riding hard through the chaos, revolver in hand. His eyes locked on Tarek. "This ends now." He roared. He fired. The bullet caught Tarek in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Clara screamed and ran to him, firing wildly at Whitmore until her revolver clicked empty. Whitmore dismounted, sneering. "You'd choose him over me?" Clara stood between them, trembling but unyielding. "I'd choose freedom over you." Whitmore raised his gun again, but Tarek, bleeding and furious, surged to his feet and tackled him. The two men fell hard, rolling through the dust, fists flying. One was bred on privilege and power, the other on survival and spirit. The fight was brutal, primal. Whitmore's strength came from arrogance. Tarek's came from something deeper, from love, from rage, from the land itself. Finally, Whitmore's gun skittered away. Tarek drove him to the ground and pinned him there. "You take everything," Tarek hissed, his hands at Whitmore's throat. "Not today." Clara grabbed Tarek's arm. "Don't," she whispered. "He's not worth your soul." Tarek hesitated, then let go. He rose, chest heaving. Whitmore coughed, scrabbling for his revolver. The shot echoed through the canyon. Whitmore froze, his expression twisting in disbelief. Then he fell, a small hole blooming red over his chest. Clara turned, eyes wide, and saw her father on horseback, rifle smoking in his hands. Thomas Bennett lowered the weapon, his face pale, his eyes full of something like sorrow. "No man threatens my daughter," he said hoarsely. For a moment, no one moved. Then the soldiers, seeing their employer dead, began to fall back. The Apache melted into the rocks, silent and watchful. The battle was over. Clara dropped to her knees beside Tarek, pressing her hands against his wound. "Stay with me," she pleaded. He caught her wrist gently. "It's only a mark," he said, his voice faint but steady. "It will heal." Her father dismounted slowly, his boots crunching in the dust. For a long while he said nothing, just looked at the two of them, his daughter covered in blood and dust beside the man she loved. "I was wrong," he said finally. "Wrong to think love could be bought, or honor could be bargained. You saved me from becoming like him." Clara rose, tears in her eyes. "Then let us live, Father. Let us be free." He nodded, weary and broken, but sincere. "Go then. The ranch will stand without you. But you," his voice faltered, "you were always meant for the open land." That night, under the bruised colors of sunset, Tarek and Clara stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The smoke of the battle drifted away like ghosts of the past. She leaned into him, her head against his chest. "It's over," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, it's beginning." And as the stars rose, she understood. Their fight was no longer about land or pride. It was about the right to love, to live, to build something new from the ashes of old hatreds. Two worlds had met in blood, but they would live on in honor. The morning after the battle dawned quiet and gold, the kind of dawn that makes the land look new again, as if the desert itself were washing away the memories of the night before. Smoke no longer rose from the canyon, and the air carried the sweet, sharp scent of mesquite and wet dust after rain. Tarek stood at the edge of a shallow creek, the bandage around his shoulder already dark with blood. He watched the water move, slow, steady, unbothered by all that had happened. Beside him, Clara Bennett crouched, rinsing her hands clean. She had not slept, yet there was peace in her eyes now. "Does it still hurt?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Only when I breathe." She gave him a look, half scolding, half tender, and pressed a fresh cloth to his wound. "Then stop trying to be brave and let me help." Tarek laughed quietly, a deep, rough sound that melted her heart. "You already did." Their eyes met, and for a long moment the world seemed to pause. No sound but the wind through the canyon, no movement but the slow current of the stream. The war, the blood, the fear, it all seemed far away now. But peace in the Wild West was never just given. It had to be built. A week later, word reached them that the soldiers had withdrawn to Fort McRae. With Whitmore dead and his hired men scattered, the Bennett ranch fell under no further claim. The territory was quiet again, at least for now. Clara's father, Thomas Bennett, visited their camp once more. He came alone, his rifle slung but unloaded, his hat in his hands. The years of hardness in his face seemed to have melted away, leaving only an older man who had seen too much. Tarek met him halfway across the plain. For a long while neither spoke. The wind tugged at their hair, carrying the distant cry of an eagle overhead. Finally, Bennett said, "You saved her life. I reckon I'll never repay that." Tarek's expression was calm, unreadable. "You gave her life," he answered. "I only fought to keep it safe." The rancher nodded slowly. "I didn't understand before. I thought she needed a husband with land and a name. But she needs something I never could give her, freedom." He looked past Tarek, where Clara stood watching from a distance, her skirt fluttering in the desert wind. "I don't pretend to understand your ways," he said quietly. "But I can see this much, you'd die for her. That's more than any man I've known." Tarek extended his hand, a simple gesture, but one heavy with meaning. Bennett took it. In that handshake, generations of anger between settlers and Apache seemed to soften, if only for a heartbeat. "Take care of her," Bennett said. Tarek nodded. "With my life." Later that day, Clara and Tarek rode out beyond the canyon, where the land stretched wide and empty beneath the burning blue sky. They stopped near a ridge where the earth broke open into a valley of red rock and whispering pines, a place untouched by fences or greed. Tarek dismounted and helped her down. "This is where my people once lived," he said. "Long before the soldiers came, before the towns. The earth remembers." Clara ran her hand along the smooth rock face, tracing ancient carvings half buried by time. "It's beautiful," she murmured. He nodded. "It will be again." They decided to stay. Not in hiding, not in fear, but in peace. Together they built a small dwelling near the creek, part wood, part stone. The Apache helped, bringing what they could spare. Some of Clara's father's men rode out with supplies, carrying his quiet blessing. It was a strange sight in that wild age, Korean men who had once pointed rifles at each other, now lifting logs side by side. Word spread through nearby towns of the Apache and the white woman who lived beyond the canyon. Some said it was scandal. Others said it was a miracle, but most simply let them be, perhaps because in some unspoken way everyone knew the desert had claimed them both. Seasons turned. The land, once scarred by battle, began to heal. Wildflowers grew again along the creek. The cry of hawks replaced the thunder of guns. Clara thrived in the open land. Her skin browned beneath the sun, her laughter grew freer. She learned the Apache tongue, their songs, their dances. She carried water from the spring, wove blankets beside the women, and helped teach the children to read from the few books she had brought. Tarek watched her each day with quiet awe. He had thought himself hardened by loss, by the long trail of grief his people had walked. But she had shown him there was still beauty left in the world. Sometimes, at dusk, he would hold her hand and whisper, "The spirits watch over us," and she would answer, "Then let them see how love endures." One evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, Tarek led Clara up to the high ridge again. The wind was cool and full of life. "Close your eyes," he said. She smiled. "Why?" "Because I wish to show you something only the heart can see." She obeyed. Tarek took from his pouch a small necklace, a pendant carved from bone shaped like the rising sun. It was the mark of his clan, once worn by his father before the wars took him. He placed it around her neck gently. When she opened her eyes, they glistened with tears. "Tarek." "In our way," he said softly. "This means you are my equal. My wife, if your heart agrees," her breath caught. "I thought we didn't need words for that," he smiled. "No, but I wanted the earth to know too." She threw her arms around him, laughter breaking through her tears. "Then let the earth remember it forever." That night, the entire camp gathered to celebrate. Fires burned bright, drums echoed through the canyon, and voices rose in song and songs of unity, of love that crossed every boundary. The stars stretched wide overhead, vast and silver, and Clara felt as though the universe itself was bearing witness. She stood beside Tarek as the firelight danced across his face. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The life you had before me?" He shook his head slowly. "Before you, I had only the wind and the blade. Now I have a home, and me," she teased gently. He turned to her, his eyes burning soft. "You are my home." Years passed, but the story of the Apache warrior and the rancher's daughter became a quiet legend, whispered across the Southwest. Some said they tamed the wild land together. Others said they simply learned to live in harmony with it. Whatever the truth, those who rode near the Red Canyon claimed that at dawn, when the first light touched the rocks, they could see two figures standing side by side, one in buckskin, one in a white dress, watching the rising sun. It was said that no matter how much the world changed, the land would always remember them, and in that vast, endless country, where blood had once soaked the soil and love had dared to bloom, the rising sun burned brighter than ever, as if blessing all that had been fought for and all that would endure.